Happy to have you with us here tonight. We're going to be joined tonight by Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, we have a lot to talk with her about. She's going to be here live in studio right here with me. Tonight is going to be her first TV interview since she announced last night that she is, in fact, running for president. Everybody's supposed to use that slightly euphemistic legalese language about forming an exploratory committee to explore the possibility of running for president. And legally, technically, that is what everybody is doing at this stage of the game. But Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is also just bluntly saying, cutting through it, actually, I'm running for president. Exploration, whatever. She's running. And Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is going to be here in just a moment. I've never had her here in studio before. I'm really looking forward to having a chance to talk with her about her run. We do have a little bit of late-breaking legal news tonight. This time last night, we had just gotten in this court filing from Robert Mueller from the special counsel's office related to the criminal case against President Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. And this obviously is a very long filing that was submitted to the court last night. It was very intimidating when it crossed the docket. In my mind, I planted several trees as penance when I printed it out so I could read it on paper. I was, in fact, worried last night about having enough time to get through the substance of this gigantic filing. I was worried about it until I actually started going through it. And I realized that a vast majority of what's in this filing, it just looks like this. It's just fully blacked out pages, completely redacted by prosecutors, lots of pages like this, even more pages in the filing that just look like this. Just the big word redacted on them, and that's it. And when you do it that way, instead of this way, one thing that happens is you save on toner. But, you get a big, important filing and a big, important case like this. This is the president's campaign chair. And it's frustrating to have all these black boxes, to not be able to read what the special counsel's office is saying about Manafort. This is a filing about what they say he has lied to prosecutors about, how they say he has breached his plea agreement since he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. I mean, mostly what we were able to discern substantively from this big, almost entirely redacted filing last night is that it's clear the Manafort case is ongoing. It's clear it involves a lot of material that is still considered sensitive, stuff that cannot be released to the public. There is clear reference to some ongoing investigations that appear to relate to Manafort and to the evidence surrounding his case. That was pretty much all we could derive. Well, now tonight, Manafort's defense team has filed their response. And their response is a request to the judge to please have some extra time to respond to these allegations from Robert Mueller in the special counsel's office. Now, Manafort's defense team, of course, when they got access to this filing last night in court in D.C., they didn't get the same redacted version that we all got. They got the version with no black boxes. They didn't get whole pages that just said redacted on them. They got whatever the exhibits were that we, the public, weren't allowed to see. And in the Manafort defense team's filing with the court tonight, where they asked for extra time, they make clear that if you do fill in what's in all the black boxes, if you do put in the real evidentiary exhibits in place of these placeholder pages that just say redacted on them, ultimately what you get, ultimately what they got last night and what the judge in this case got last night is the unredacted version of this declaration of evidence against Paul Manafort, and apparently it amounts to more than 800 pages. So I thought this is a lot. This is the redacted version. You unredact this, and apparently it's over 800 pages. So again, we don't know much about the substance and the details of what Robert Mueller and the special counsel's office say the president's campaign chair lied to them about, and how they know that he lied to them. But we do know now that their statement of evidence to prove their case amounts to more than 800 pages of evidence. And as they told the judge last night in their filing, that's not all they've got. Here's 800 pages. Do you want any more? So some of that news, the response from Manafort's team, that's breaking tonight. The clearest conclusion I think we can draw from all of this back and forth is that this is very much a live issue before the courts. This issue involving the president's campaign chairman and the ongoing criminal case against him, it's very much live. The prospect of this being over and him being sentenced and this being done with appears to be quite a ways off. And one of the offshoots of the Manafort investigation and that criminal case involving the president's campaign chair that also had an important development today in Washington. Paul Manafort, during his time running the Trump campaign, he is known to have offered private briefings about the campaign to a Russian oligarch named Oleg Deripaska. We've also learned from other Mueller court filings that prosecutors have also alleged that Manafort shipped internal private polling data from the Trump campaign to a close business associate of his, who is a Russian, and who is a Russian who is assessed by the FBI to be linked to Russian intelligence. That person, allegedly linked to Russian intelligence, to whom Manafort shipped internal private Trump campaign polling data during the campaign, that guy is also known to have been Manafort's intermediary with that same Russian oligarch he was offering briefings to, Oleg Deripaska. So the Manafort criminal case continues to work its way through the courts. We can still only speculate about the hundreds of pages of evidence that the Mueller team has shown the defense and has shown the court about their case against Manafort. We still don't know really basic information about why the Trump campaign might have been sending internal campaign data to Russia in the middle of the election campaign, why they would have been offering private briefings to this Russian oligarch close to Putin and the Russian government. But presumably we will eventually find that stuff out, at least some of it. I mean, Manafort's case will eventually be finally adjudicated. He will presumably at some point be sentenced. The Mueller investigation, as it pertains to Manafort and these connections through Manafort between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, that investigation at some point will come to a close, and we, the public, will know something about its ultimate disposition. And presumably someday we will understand this better. But before we find any of that out, while this is all ongoing, while the criminal case against Manafort still spins, while the Mueller investigation still proceeds, and while everything they file with the court that's public facing is totally redacted, I mean, before we know what Mueller has turned up about this Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, and what in God's name he was doing mixed up with the Trump campaign in 2016, we now know, before we get any of that stuff resolved, the Trump administration will succeed this month in its effort to prematurely lift U.S. government sanctions on companies associated with Oleg Deripaska. And this is something that we've been covering for a while now. Shortly before Christmas, the Trump administration quietly released plans to lift U.S. government sanctions on companies connected to Deripaska. Deripaska is sanctioned because of the Russian government interfering in the U.S. presidential election in 2016. Now, the sanctions on Deripaska's companies are consequential. The companies linked to Deripaska happen to be huge companies. So even if you set aside the sanctions effects on Deripaska personally, unsanctioning these huge Russian companies will also just be really substantially economically beneficial to the Russian economy as a whole. Under American law governing sanctions like this, Congress has 30 days to review any decision by the administration to lift these kinds of sanctions. Within that 30-day window, Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer brought forward legislation to, in fact, challenge that decision by the Trump administration, to block the lifting of the Deripaska-related sanctions. As we reported last night, every Democrat in the Senate chamber voted with Schumer on this, as did 11 Republican senators. A heterogeneous bunch of Republican senators who broke ranks with Mitch McConnell and sided with the Democrats to stop the Trump administration from lifting these Deripaska-related sanctions. That's a big number of Republican senators breaking ranks, especially after the Trump administration lobbied the Senate and the House really aggressively on this issue. Well, today, this afternoon, despite those 11 Republican senators breaking ranks and being willing to side with the Democrats on this, it turned out to be not enough, because today there was a crucial vote on this matter, which came with not a 50-vote threshold, but a 60-vote threshold to stop the Trump administration from lifting these Deripaska-related sanctions. Schumer and the Democrats and the breakaway Republicans were able to put together 57 votes, but 57 isn't 60. And so you can thank top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell. You can thank all of these other Republican senators who get all of this public credit for supposedly being so hawkish and so realistic on Russia. You can thank them all for voting today to give Vladimir Putin's government in Russia a huge, big economic present. And voting to give Oleg Deripaska the biggest break of his life even while his potential role in the Russian attack on our election remains a critical matter that is under ongoing investigation related to multiple criminal cases. Last night I said that would be a test case in terms of whether or not the Republicans had any compunction about the Trump administration and the president and its relationship to the Russian government. It was a test case. They didn't pass the test. 11 of them did, not enough to actually make a difference. Today also brought another round of revelations flowing from the bombshell Washington Post reporting this weekend, from Washington Post reporter Greg Miller. His bombshell several days ago was the revelation that President Trump confiscated his translator's notes and otherwise blocked any U.S. officials from finding out anything or obtaining any record or readout or notes from his multiple meetings with Vladimir Putin since he has been president. Well, that reporting, again, first broken by the Washington Post this weekend. Today, Peter Baker at the New York Times builds on that. He reports on an unusual phone call that President Trump placed in July 2017 when he was on his way home from what we believe to have been Trump's first in-person meeting with Vladimir Putin in Germany. That Germany meeting was the one where the president reportedly confiscated his translator's notes and told the translator that the translator couldn't tell any other U.S. officials about the content of his discussion with Putin. After that mysterious meeting between Trump and Putin in Germany, which the president went to such great lengths to keep secret, which he behaved afterwards, one after which he behaved so strangely in terms of his relationship with the translator and his barring any U.S. officials from knowing what happened there. After that Germany meeting, Peter Baker reports today that on the way home from that meeting, Trump placed a phone call to a New York Times reporter from Air Force One on the flight home from Germany. And in that phone call, the president insisted to the reporter that, quote, the Russians were falsely accused of election interference when it comes to the U.S. presidential election in 2016. And needless to say, of course, the Russians were not wrongly accused of interfering in our election. But for some reason, after speaking directly and privately, in fact, secretly, with Vladimir Putin face-to-face for a long time, President Trump tried to sell the Russian government's false version of those events to an American reporter. As president of the United States, not like as some pundit paid by the Kremlin to go on Sputnik and spout Putin-approved talking points on this issue, but as the sitting president of the United States, placing apparently unsolicited phone calls to the New York Times to deliver them the Russian government's false line on that story. Nice work if you can get it. How's the pay? Peter Baker further reports that a year later, after the Helsinki meeting, and we all remember the Helsinki press conference, but remember, the Trump-Putin meeting in Helsinki also included a 2-hour meeting between Trump and Putin, again, the two of them alone, with no other U.S. officials in the room, just Trump and Putin in Helsinki this past year. After that 2-hour meeting, U.S. intelligence officials were reportedly so disturbed by the fact that they had no American observers for that discussion, no notes, no readout, no American account whatsoever about what happened between Trump and Putin in that room over 2 hours. U.S. intelligence agencies were so disturbed by that they attempted to, quote, glean details about that meeting from surveillance of Russians who talked about it afterwards. Oh, right, because the Russians were allowed to know about it, right? Whatever Trump said, whatever Putin and Trump said to each other in that secret meeting, which no Americans were allowed to know about, it was only secret to the Americans, to the American government. It was not secret within the Russian government. The Russian government presumably kept their notes of that meeting. The Russian government presumably did a readout for other officials in their own government and in their own intelligence agencies. And other Russians, besides Vladimir Putin, apparently talked about the contents of that meeting afterwards because they knew something about it. Because Trump's behavior and discussions with Putin at that meeting are known to the Russian government. They are just not known to the U.S. government, including to our intelligence agencies. I wonder why that is. So we learned all of that today.